Hello and welcome to the Baker Heights Church of Christ podcast. This is Fellowship Feed, and tonight I have a special guest. This is Larry Bailey. He's a brother in Christ that is part of the congregation that I go to here in Abilene, Texas. And he is here to talk to us about a really interesting topic that I like, apologetics. How's it going, Larry?
Good, really good.
I just wanted to start off and ask if you had anything to say, and if not, you can kind of jump in and define apologetics perhaps for us.
Okay. Well, first I'll just say I'm honored to be asked to have a discussion with you about this. I think I told you I'm an enthusiast, not an expert. You know, there's a lot of men that have dedicated their lives to researching this stuff, and we've got lots and lots of material that we can study if it's something we're interested in, and we should be. And as far as a definition, you know, you go to the dictionary and it'll lay out some systematic argumentative discourse in defense, which just means you're discussing something in defense of some position you take.
Sure.
And so that's what we're doing. We're not arguing. we don't want to be arguing with people.
Right.
Argumentative in the sense of a reasoned debate, and that's what we're all about. And we don't want to win arguments. And so, as far as Christian, a definition that applies to us, I wrote it down here: a rational, organized defense of the Christian faith. That's really what we're talking about. It's
Right.
simple,
Definitely.
and so we have a perspective on the world, a worldview based on Scripture and the existence of God. So much of the world doesn't have that worldview, right. And much of it doesn't have a belief in God. Mm-hmm. And there's, you know, we're on the internet. The internet is so full of negativity about the existence of God, and some of it is very, very persuasive.
Right.
And so we need to be able and ready to fight that.
And defend our faith, as the Bible says.
Defend the faith, our
Definitely.
faith. Exactly, yep.
Yeah, and just to be clear, apologetics is not specific to religion, as you said.
That's exactly right.
But we are talking about it in relation to religion, in relation to Christianity. My understanding is it actually comes from the Greek word apologia, however you say that, which is literally the word defense, or to defend. So yeah, in response to what you were saying, in relation to Christianity, I've always looked at it as, you know, we have to have a reason, a defense of our faith, and the reason I guess the reason we need to do that is because some people look at our faith and look at Christianity and they don't understand it, and they might know what they know by worldly examples or by false, you know, information, things that go on, especially on the internet. You have a lot of confusion, and truth is not always clear. So apologetics is a way to kind of sift through that by pointing people to truisms and truths that help them understand the actual Christianity as we know it, and hopefully that can give them a clearer picture of it that allows them to come to their own decisions, you know, with knowledge and what's the word I'm looking for? A thoroughly educated perspective of it, as you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and everybody is starting in a different place, and so we've got to be ready to address their specific situation,
right?
As best we can. I mean, we can't have every answer,
sure,
but we can have a humble approach to having a discussion and say, I don't know, but I can get back to you on that.
Sure,
but I do know this, and spell out an apologetic thought that might still plant some seeds in their minds, even if they're negative about it.
Right. I'm not sure if you're familiar with William Lane Craig. He's a kind of a YouTube famous apologetic preacher, whatever you want to call it. But and he writes books. He's an author, and I like a lot of his writings. I don't agree with everything he says, which is true of, you know, most, you know,
I don't agree with me sometimes.
Exactly. So I'm not at all criticizing him, but, you know, I don't agree with everything. But he's very smart, he's very logical, and he's very reasoned. And I like one of the things that he said once about apologetics in a book that I read of his, and it said, I'm paraphrasing this probably horribly, but something along the lines of, you're not going to convert someone to Christianity with apologetics. Not necessarily, anyway. But what you could do is you're enabling them to believe that there is reasonable and logical validity to Christianity, so that in the instance that they come into a situation where they're, posited with this opportunity to possibly come to Christ, the barrier of disbelief will have been removed from them by having that knowledge beforehand. I just worded that horribly, but, you know what I mean.
It's a great thought, and that's one of my reasons is that we for studying apologetics is that we simply plant seeds, right. and Sam has been talking about it in his lessons on Sunday mornings, that we just take some action, say something, and apologetics gives us something to say that does exactly that. Faith doesn't come from apologetics; it comes from the Word of God. But if there's a barrier there, even to the Word, we got to break that down. In
right.
apologetics, that's great stuff.
Absolutely,
we've got to break that down, and even if it's just taking a chipping hammer to that rock wall, it's got to start somewhere, and we need to be ready when the time comes to do that.
Sure,
that's great stuff.
Definitely, and as we said, it's kind of done in the form of a systematic, I hate the word argument because like you said, we're not arguing, but argument in the conversational sense, a systematic argument to defend that belief. And when you say systematic, what do you mean by that? I mean, how would you define the act of apologeticizing somebody?
Well, it's you have to have in your mind what you know. I mean, and you have to take the time. And I'm sorry, I'm going to say that dirty word, the M word, memorization. Sometimes we just have to memorize some of those definitions, some of those concepts, and we just have them in our scabbard, on our belt.
Right.
And so it's systematic in the sense that we're ready to go ABC on a moment's notice. And again, I'll say it's not even just ABC. Sometimes you can just pivot to something else that you do know, even though they're talking about something else. Because the wall is still, if this is the wall, a disbelief in the Bible, for example. And maybe they have this question, but you don't have that answer. You're not being deceptive. You're just pivoting to, well, did you know that the New Testament documents are the most reliable ancient documents there are? And they'll, well, what do you mean? That's just stuff. Anyway, so systematic in the sense of I know what I'm going to say.
Sure.
I know what I know.
Like somewhat prepared, planned, if you will.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you have to have an outline. It wouldn't be bad to have an outline that you drew up and memorized.
Right.
There I go again with that word. But
it's the same idea as any, and the Bible talks about this to some degree, like a race or an athlete. It's like the athlete doesn't go into the race unprepared. It doesn't mean they know the exact steps they're going to take throughout the whole track. Maybe they do. But the point is, they're training for it. And I'm not saying that you necessarily have to train for apologetics specifically, but Ephesians talks about the Word of God in the sense of it being a weapon or a tool, and specifically in the sense of defending the faith, if you will. And apologetics is, like you said, just one arrow in the quiver of many arrows that you might have, that is a tool that you can use in your scabbard or whatever. So, yeah, that's a great idea, a great way to talk about it. Now, I know that some people look at apologetics as generally people came from something into something else. So, like, for instance, maybe they were an atheist and now they're a Christian. And generally, I find those are the most persuasive apologetics because a lot of them will tell you why they made that journey and what convinced them, at least in the knowledge sense, to come to Christianity. Now, are you familiar with any famous apologetics that you wanted to talk about, or is there anything specific you want to go into?
Well, there's one. The first person that I ever heard speak on apologetics was John Clayton.
Okay.
When I was a senior in high school. And he was raised in an atheistic family. Yep. His mother and father were atheists, very educated people, I think. And I remember he said that his mother would tell him, only stupid people believe in the Bible. You don't want to be stupid, do you? And that stuck with him. And that's the way he was raised. But he would start to ask questions of professors, some like, very basic things like what was before the Big Bang, or the questions like
Sure.
that were very deep, and their answer would simply be, well, that's not science, that's a theological study. When you start talking about beginnings and really deep things. And so John Clayton is a great example. And again, he was the first person I ever heard, and he approaches apologetics from a scientific direction, which a lot of it is. Some of it's historical. Mm-hmm. We can talk about that in a minute, I guess. But he just shows he showed his journey from atheism,
Sure.
and it started with his own questions, but then he met someone who was a Christian, a young lady, and she was very persistent. And anyway, so John Clayton is one of the great ones, and he and I don't know if I agree with him 100% about everything, but
Sure.
he is a fantastic apologist.
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite, personally, and this is going to sound so cliche, but I like C.S. Lewis.
Oh yeah,
I mean, he's very well known, and again, I don't agree with everything he says, but I think he has a great intellect in his way of thinking.
Oh yeah,
and famously, he wrote Mere Christianity and Screwtape Letters and all those books. And Mere Christianity specifically had I don't want to say profound, but had a pretty, I guess, profound impact on the way I looked at certain aspects of God in the Bible. And he has a perspective I've never seen before, that he kind of looks at things another way around, and it's really interesting to see that. So he's probably my, I guess, favorite apologetic, if you'd call it that. So I highly recommend Mere Christianity if anyone hasn't read that.
yeah.
Now, what about specifically, we're talking about the nature of apologetics, but what about specific apologetic themes, or what's another word for it?
Arguments.
Arguments, yeah. So specific arguments.
Well, there are some kind of umbrella themes, and again, I'm an enthusiast, not an expert.
Sure.
But some of the umbrella themes that are out there are like the teleological argument, and you get really wordy with some of these things, but don't let it. I try not to let it scare me.
Sure.
They're just words, but there's things behind them that are pretty easy concepts: teleological, axiological,
Cosmological.
anthropic, cosmological. These are umbrella arguments, and they come from really smart people. Teleological is just simply the design argument. You look around, everything around me right now is designed and built by somebody.
Right.
And so the argument simply is, boy, the universe, everything in the universe seems to have a design to it.
Right.
Well,
Even more specifically, I've heard it referred to as an intelligent design.
intelligent design, exactly.
So when you see a computer and you see the way it functions,
Yeah.
I don't know a person that would assume that was just something that came out of random evolutionary change of molecules, like
Exactly.
something intently designed it to function that way. I've always joked around, this is just my own ridiculous statement, but I always ask, well, what if you saw a Toyota Camry on Mars just appear? Like, I mean, that wouldn't make any sense, because why would a Toyota Camry be on? It wouldn't. You would know that there was something about that Camry that had been intelligently designed. It has functions and things that just would not come about naturally. So anyway, you look at that from the human perspective, and it's clear to see the things that humans have created. And then, like you said, you look at the nature of the universe and nature itself, and when you start to see the complexities in the systems and DNA and all these random things that are so finely tuned and so perfectly designed to interoperate with each other, I believe that's the thrust of the argument, if I'm not mistaken. Is
Yep,
like, well, how
yep.
do you deny that that's not from an intelligent creator that was even more intelligent than us? And if there's an intelligent creator more intelligent than us who created the universe, he can't be in the universe. He has to be outside of the universe. And when you
Exactly.
start to describe that, you're basically describing God. And that's not even getting to the God of the Bible specifically, but it's pointing to a higher intelligence outside of the universe, which ultimately you can then take other evidence towards the Bible. But
Yep, which gets to the cosmological argument.
Right.
I might want to go back to teleological, but that
Sure.
cosmological argument that there is Nothing
doesn't come from nothing.
Exactly. Thank you.
Basically, I mean,
my mind went.
That's okay.
And it's gotten to the point that that if everything has a beginning, that exists has a beginning, the universe exists, therefore it must have a beginning. And scientists, and I don't like to put words in scientists' mouth, but a lot of them say, even some atheists say that, there's so much that points to a beginning, but refuse the God, the eternal power outside of the universe existence, that they've gone to the now a multiverse. That the answer is that there is must be multiple universes. That's really the anthropic. And that's it's a little confusing sometimes.
Sure.
These kind of overlap.
Yep.
The teleological with the anthropic. The anthropic is a subset of the teleological in that what you said about fine-tuning, that everything in the universe seems to be fine-tuned for the existence of life.
Right.
Physics constants, chemical constants, astronomical distance. If we're a little closer to the sun, we're just a scorched earth. If we're a little further away from the sun, we're an ice cube. And the answer is the multiverse answer that I mistakenly said earlier. That there is, it's so perfect that it must have happened. But it seems so impossible for all that to happen in one universe. There must be multiple universes, and we just happen to be it kind of boggles the mind.
But it would actually mean that there would have to be an infinite universe.
Yes, and it's it pushes the bounds of reasonableness, which is faith is about reason,
right,
and evidence. God doesn't expect us to have a blind faith. He gives us evidence and reason.
Not to interrupt, what I think is interesting about that argument and arguments like it is that you're basically trading one thing that you find hard to believe in with another thing that's equally as hard to believe in or more so.
Without evidence.
But why? Exactly. What's the force to bring you to those conclusions other than you're trying to – I'm not saying all scientists do this or anything. That's not my point. But some people are trying to just keep away from God in a sense. And like one of the arguments is, well, who created the creator? One of those philosophical. And that argument kind of always intrigued me. But at the same time, I think it might have been Craig or maybe even Jordan Peterson at one point. I'm not sure. Someone said something about the idea that everything that comes into an existence had to have a creator is essentially true. Nothing can come out of nothing. That's not possible. Even by the most strict scientific minds that are, talking about creation of the universe, they'll admit that nothing can come out of nothing. Mm-hmm. So then when you ask, well, who created the creator? That's kind of a misguided question because God is the eternal. He always has been. He is. He always will be. He is unchanging. Mm-hmm. Things come out of him. So he doesn't need to have an original creator. He is just the foundation from which all things come. Yeah. Now, the universe, we know by evidence, was created. Therefore, again, you go back to the argument before. That means it came from something. Well, it didn't come from nothing. Well, if it didn't come from nothing, it came from something greater than the universe. Mm-hmm. And you get into those same kind of arguments that lead to a more intelligent, more powerful thing that's outside of the universe, which even outside of the Bible would be considered a god of sorts. Yeah. So anyway, that's just something that I've always found kind of interesting.
And that's that. They use the term uncaused first cause. Yeah. The arguments that those people are making are always within the realm of the creation.
Right, exactly.
We're talking about something that's not within even our ability to fully comprehend, but God makes it clear that that's where he is and what he is and who he is.
Sure.
He is all-powerful. He is eternal. Mm-hmm. He is uncaused. And that is the only answer that all the evidence I've seen points to.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I'm a computer technician, and computers are such a great analogy for so much of God and faith and things. And in this regard, I like to compare it to, if I create a computer, I'm not in the computer. I'm not even part of the computer. I am outside of the computer. I created it. I can put evidences and signs of me in the computer, programming, imagery, sound, all these things that, again, you can take this analogy pretty far, but I am not the computer.
Yeah,
and I think
that's a great point.
That's where people kind of conflate those two things and assume that God is inside his creation, and that's not true. Even though Jesus came as a man, which is a whole other story, it's not the same thing to say that he, as a God, is in his creation. He's outside of his creation because he created it.
Yep.
So that's just kind of an important thing to keep in mind, I think. So going back to the teleological argument, because we didn't really finish that one. So you're observing the order and the complexity of the universe and kind of gaining evidence of God through that, right? So that assumes that the universe has a purpose, right?
Yeah.
And it basically couldn't have come together by chance. That would be too improbable, if you want to call it that.
Highly.
And again, that leads you to the idea of an intelligent creator. Have you ever heard of it compared to a watch? I'm sure you've heard that analysis before.
A watch, a typewriter and a monkey and a typewriter, and Shakespeare, all these funny analogies. But go ahead with your, maybe I haven't heard your
the
version.
Watch. Well, I think the watch analogy is interesting because someone creates a watch, they take all the care and effort and time, they plan it, they design it, they put it together, and then when it's all finally done, they wind it up and they start it. And if you look at science, most things that I've researched believe that whether you believe in a Big Bang or not, the universe started from a singularity or from some small point that then exploded at an incredible rate. And over time, which is a whole other topic, it has slowed down. And some scientists believe that one of two things will happen. Either one, the universe will continue to slow down and come to a heat death, and then ultimately everything will just stop and die, and that's the end of the universe. Some actually believe that it might reverse direction. Either way, the idea is like a watch. You're winding it up, and it's running its course, and that spring is running out, and then ultimately that watch will no longer function. But that's the basics of it. So it's kind of an analogy to that.
Yeah.
But it's fine-tuned, I guess, too, I would say.
Yeah. It's fulfilling its purpose in what God designed it for, but He is upholding those laws, and boy, it gets really interesting and really way beyond my ability to understand when you start looking at things at the atomic level. Everything does tend to slow down. It's whatever law of thermodynamics.
Sure.
But when you look at the atomic level, electrons and protons, electrons don't change. They're the same speed. They're always unchanging.
Sure.
And I'm sure there's a lot deeper that physicists could go with that, but the thought that God upholds His creation at that level, at the atomic level, seems to me to be evidence because those, and again, they have physical laws that they answer to, but which God created. But yeah, it is a regulated, ordered universe that God has set into motion, and it's recognizable with the right eyes. And I want to be something I want to say. I want to be very careful about, people's eyesight, because people are products of their experience, their raising.
Sure.
And like I was talking about John Clayton, we just need to help people and help ourselves. This is kind of a sidebar. with the way we have been brought up and what we've been exposed to, we need to help people see better, and have patience with them, gentleness, as Peter said, to help them see and not be too harsh on them. and sometimes I am a little, why don't you see this? Well, they don't have the same eyes that I do, because I'm from a different place. And hopefully you get them there. And my point is what Peter said about being ready to defend that command, which is one of the reasons why we should study apologetics. We're to be ready at any moment to defend the gospel when someone gives us the opportunity. And part of that command is yet with gentleness and reverence.
Right.
And so I just want to be sure I respect people's where they're coming from, and be patient and gentle with them. Even if it's some PhD scientist, a professor in physics.
And we don't want it to seem like we think we're better than someone or anything like that. And honestly, you have to, as a Christian, this is one of the pet peeves, I guess, of mine. As a Christian, I always believe that you had to be of at least somewhat open-mindedness to come to Christianity, because you had to accept truths and things that you didn't believe previously. That shouldn't stop when you become a Christian. You need to stay open-minded. You might be wrong about something, and if you can show me that I'm wrong about something, I want to be open enough to say, let me look at that, let me analyze it. Okay, I was wrong. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think that, it is very easy to go into arguments about things, and whether your intents are good or not, it can devolve into a I'm right, you're wrong kind of thing. And that's not at all what I think apologetics should be. I think apologetics should be, I'm going to posit some evidence that I think shows that God is true, shows evidence towards the biblical truth. And I'm just putting it out there, and you can have that information. You can analyze it. If you agree with it, awesome. If you don't, okay, we can have a conversation about it. Yeah.
And even as a Christian, I was raised by godly parents. They were good Christian people, and I'm thankful for them. And they raised me in the Christian faith. But it's still my responsibility, and I've pursued that. It was still my responsibility to find that faith for myself, right? To prove not legacy this, whether it's legacy atheism or legacy Christianity, neither one of those will get you anywhere. Faith is about your relationship with God, and so it's up to me to check my parents. That's the bottom line. I need to check my parents to make sure they were right, and make sure what I have as faith is what God has in His Word. Right. And so whether you're a Christian and you're confirming your faith, or an atheist who's having questions about the existence of God, it is our responsibility to do that for ourselves. Right. And hopefully we help people to do that, and have a gentle, reverent approach to helping people find that. Definitely. I don't want to win arguments. I want people to have what I have. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a gift. I don't want to shove a gift down your throat. I want to give it to you. And if you accept it, awesome. Yes. If you don't, that's okay too. That's your choice. That's okay. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I agree. I have a slightly different upbringing, and I always want to be sensitive when I talk about this, because I love my parents, and my parents are amazing, and they're loving, and they're very, very, I'm not sure the word to use. They're great, loving parents. But I grew up in a Catholic household, and I love Catholic family members, Catholic friends. They're great, and a lot of them have a very fervent heart for Jesus, and that's all great. So I was raised in a very good atmosphere that I learned about Christ, I learned about God, I learned about things. But as I grew up, I investigated things, and I saw that there were things about that church belief system that I don't agree with. And that's not at all a criticism of them. Again, there's some Catholics that are probably better people than I am. But my point is just that, it is ultimately our decision whether we accept the calling that God has called us to. And we can't
pin our salvation on family or tradition or anything other than God knows your heart, and He wants you to seek Him and find Him of your own, volition. I think that's very important, and that's true of anybody that's seeking Christ in any way. So seek, and you shall find.
That's right.
So to get back to some of the argument-related stuff, we can't obviously sit here and talk about all the arguments because there's a lot of them, and they are really complicated. But there are a lot of really interesting evidences that I find unique, and I'm curious if there are any that you find particularly interesting to you, like fascinating maybe. Or not even necessarily an argument in the apologetic sphere of arguments, but maybe just something in general that you look at in the world, in your mind, that you kind of think is, wow, that really points to God.
Yeah. There are a lot of things that, as I've gotten older, you look and you see something that said, wow, God did that. He created that. But in the realm of science, I have a degree in biology. Woohoo! Biology interests me. Chemistry interests me. But some of the systems that are being discovered continually in the realm of biochemistry, the things, the intricacies, the complexities, and the interplay of all these systems, it seems that as science, say biology, human biology grows and gets a better and better understanding, it just seems to point more and more to a design, an intelligent design, and a designer. And whether you're talking about DNA, which is an amazing information system, how does that just happen? And you've got an alphabet of so many amino acids that come together to form this information highway that creates a human being the way they are, or the structure of the hemoglobin protein the proteins in our body. They don't even know how many proteins there are. We think of protein as meat and muscle, but proteins they perform all these functions, little locks and keys that make us work. And some of them are, there's very few. Some of them there are a lot of. They're on surfaces. Hey, I'm getting into the weeds, but the complexity that we continue to find in the human body is, to me, a clear indicator of design. You look at the human eye, the complexity of the human eye. And I think, how did that evolve along with a liver? I mean, but the eye has to have the liver. And all these functions and these forms that make the eye function and work and connect to our brain, it's amazing. And I just have gotten to the point that it's just simply unreasonable for me to accept. And again, I'm not being judgmental. It's unreasonable for me to accept that simply happened by chance over a long period of time. It doesn't compute to me. And so biology is one of my favorites.
Sure.
Historiography is one of my others. But we might not have time to talk about that. But a totally different subject. Look it up.
I've always been fascinated by light, not just from a scientific perspective, but biblically, we know that God is talked about as light, and there's a lot of references to God and light and whatever. But scientifically, a lot of the scientific principles we see line up with the descriptors in the Bible. For instance, a lot of scientists now believe that light functions as a particle and a wave. So it has a duality to it that's almost unexplainable, which is very similar to the ideas of the Trinity or something like that, where God can be two things but different and the same, and it's kind of confusing. And then what has always fascinated me about light is I've read the Theory of Relativity by Einstein. You can get that; it's easy to read. It's not as complicated as people think. You can go get it on Amazon. Really, it's awesome. He talks, well, it starts out easy. He does get into some heavy math, but it starts off and he talks about simple examples of people and trains and clocks, and kind of gives examples of how to look at things from a relative perspective. Then it gets heavy into math. But one of the things he talks about is the speed of light, and a lot of scientists talk about the speed of light. But what's really interesting about the speed of light is the closer you approach the maximum speed of light, the slower time gets. So theoretically, if you were to achieve the fastest possible velocity of light, then, well, which is a constant, but if you were to achieve that somehow, you would not be moving in time. Time would stand still, which is really interesting because if you are God and you are light, you're outside of time. Time doesn't go forward or backwards for you. You're an observer of time. So I things like that, they're not proof of anything, but I've just always found that fascinating.
And it's part of God's creation.
It seems to me, and again, like you said, I'm not judgmental or anything, but it just seems to me so obviously put there, even if there's not necessarily a truth to what I just said, there are absolutely aspects of that design that are so far beyond what would be by chance. Like it's a designed thing. And especially when you look at light can kill things. It can burn things. Light can give things life. It can give you energy. It has all of these multifaceted purposes and functions that when are taken in totality, it's the most fascinating thing to me. Light and then water, which also is very a biblical thing. Water is life, and water can kill and take life, and water can give life, and it can provide. And the construction of biological things that contain water, and it just goes on and on and on, and we could be here forever. But those things fascinate me. I love the physical sciences and electricity, gravity, all those types of things. When you really start to delve into them in a deep kind of study, it's fascinating how designed they seem and how related to so many other facets of biblical studies and theological studies that they have relationships with. Is crazy.
And they're all interrelated. That
Absolutely.
Getting back to that anthropic fine-tuning, the gravity, the speed of light, all these constants that all have to line up to make all life possible. It's astounding.
And it goes against all scientific understanding of physics. I don't want to get too far into this because it's easy to misconstrue this, but one of the things that I think people look at the idea of entropy, and so you have this, I'm going to butcher this, I know this is not the exact definition, but the idea is that complex systems basically devolve into chaos. They don't get into an organized, structured, intelligent form. They tend towards chaos. And that's true of DNA. It's true of biological reproduction. It's true of pretty much any system that you look at. So when you look from a scientific perspective at any theories in science, they tend to try to explain away that proclivity towards chaos in ways that often don't make any sense. But what does make sense is if they were designed in a specific way by an intelligent designer, they would have the necessary complexities to fulfill their purpose. Well, let me put it that way. I'm not saying they don't devolve to chaos. I'm strictly saying that there are things put in place that have purposes and have functions that come to their appropriate conclusions that could only happen through design. They couldn't happen through natural happenstance, because if those entropic, if that's a word, systematical, scientific understandings were true, these things wouldn't happen. They would just devolve into nothing and disappear.
That's been my uneducated problem with evolution, that I think it's the second law of thermodynamics you're talking about. Where,
and that's why I said entropy is not the best word, because there's more to entropy than that.
But evolution seems to go against that, to
or at least
to go toward complexity as opposed to devolve to less complex, to erode, whatever term that. But that's what evolution does. You've gone from chemical mass to complex human animal structures, and it
and the statistics that we have, the statistics that we have in science, apart from religion, show that biological reproduction creates flaws that statistically outweigh benefits. So to believe that the somehow evolutionary changes would outweigh those negative deterrents that are introduced through, reproduction is just statistically improbable. And of course, they go to the idea of statistical probability over time. But the problem is those negative traits would build up so greatly that they would outweigh any positive traits. I've always said that, I've kind of described it like this. I believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution. And this isn't, I don't mean this to turn into an anti-evolution thing, because I'll be honest, we don't have proof for or against either, I don't believe. I think we have evidence. And I think you have to look at the totality of the evidence. And I believe that doing that disproves evolution in the sense that the evidence outweighs, the positive evidence, if that makes sense. But so cross species, we have no examples of that. And
that's the big point. I'm not opposed to evolution. Evolution, it's a fact. Adaptation.
Adaptation, exactly.
But what happens in evolution in the Darwinian sense is speciation.
Right.
And they claim that's what happens. We have all these different species, but there's zero evidence that I'm aware of, maybe somewhere, but of speciation. There's adaptation. Different animals adapt, and it is the Darwinian principle of the survival of the fittest, or adaptation to an environment. We have all these breeds of cattle through an evolution, a designed evolution to create a Hereford or all these Longhorns, whatever. And so, I don't have a problem with adaptation and evolution in a sense, but speciation, which is the core of, I think, Darwinism, if I can get it out, is it's just not proven, and it's.
And I've researched that pretty extensively, and there are supposed examples of a few fossils that have shown that or whatever. But the challenge with all of those things is that they're assumptions. You can take fossils that we have accurate historical records of scientists' views on certain fossils that have changed over time. Yeah. They thought, this was this way, and now 10 years later, we misunderstood that, now it's this. So it's like, even if you said I found evidence of a cross-species thing, just comparing one single fossil, that to me is not evidence. I would want, concrete evidence. I would want something that's a well-established pool of information showing something. And that's not to say, because some people look at, if there's even one example, it disproves your theory. Maybe if it's 100% proven, but when we're looking at the proof as they describe it, it's usually theories and assumptions based on very, very few examples of possible, you know what I mean? You get further and further down the line, and it kind of falls apart, in my opinion. And
that gets to something that I want to talk about. It was, you mentioned proof versus possibility, and that's in our discussions with people. Apologetics has it's I want to say something, but there's also another aspect to it. But a majority of apologetics is based on circumstantial evidence.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if you, I got a book here, Cold Case Christianity.
Is that the one we studied them Wednesday night?
He does a great job as a former policeman, talking about direct versus indirect evidence.
Right.
Direct being eyewitness testimony, indirect being circumstantial evidence. Right. In most cases, people will talk, it's just a circumstantial case. Well, that's probably one of the strongest cases you can have, because circumstantial evidence lays layer upon layer upon layer of evidence. One piece alone doesn't make the case and could be argued,
Right.
perhaps by the defense attorney.
Sure.
But when you pile layer upon layer upon layer, this murderer, we didn't see his face, but he drove a yellow Carmen Ghia. He had a key to the place. He had a bent bat in his house.
We found his DNA on the
We
suspect.
found DNA on this and that, and all those are indirect evidence. I've probably got a bent bat in my house somewhere,
Right.
from my powerful hits when I was young playing softball. But when you pile all these individual pieces of evidence together,
Right.
it forms a case that is not a case of possibilities. Which you can think of anything as a possible explanation for something, but it's useless when there is a mountain of circumstantial evidence that points in another specific direction. And that's what apologetics is about. And we need to help people understand that. When someone pulls out one argument, and you might be able to say, yeah, I never thought about that. But there's this and this and this and this and then this. And when you look at the New Testament documents, there's this and this. You build a case. And so when you see teleological, axiological, anthropic, cosmological, and then you see all the things under those umbrellas, that is you're building this mountain
Sure.
of circumstantial evidence that an honest heart will make a judgment, a reasoned judgment about the existence of God. And that's where an open heart comes from, because you can have a closed mind to evidence, and so you have to check your bias at the door. Ask people to do that, and just look at the evidence honestly. But again, I digress from what you said. But when you said proof and possibilities, a lot of times people want to talk about possibilities. Aliens maybe came to Earth and started the creation. Well, that's possible, but where did the aliens come from? Even that doesn't answer the
Where
question.
does the evidence build to that conclusion, right?
But it's important to help people understand evidence.
You made me think of a great
Mountains.
movie.
Yeah.
In talking about the evidence in the sense of a court, and oftentimes you talk about building evidence to prove the case. Well, you can also do the opposite. You can show that the evidence is faulty and disprove the case. And it reminded me of the movie 12 Angry Men, which I think is a great movie if you haven't seen it. And, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but essentially someone's convicted of something they didn't do, and everyone immediately assumes, based on the very what do you call that? The more seemingly obvious evidence, they think he did it, so they're ready to all just convict him. And this one guy stands up and says, that doesn't make sense. Look at it logically. And then he builds a case, and over time, helps them to see that it's not what they thought it was, and the evidence they thought was not strong, and his evidence was strong, and made a case against it. So anyway, it's a really good movie in that regard, so I thought that was kind of neat. Another thing I want to say, just to conclude the thing about evolution, is if you read Origin of the Species, Darwin didn't have near the confidence that we do of his theory. He literally said about a lot of the things that he wrote about that he didn't even see that some of it was even possible, but he was positing these theories. And so he was not like, this is fact, this is fact. We turned it into that over time. So I always just found that kind of interesting. If you look at his viewpoint of his own theory, it's a lot shakier than you might think. Yeah. And that's not to say that everything he says is wrong either, but anyhow, I think that's really interesting, and I do think we need to take all of everything we've talked about tonight, and we need to keep it in the perspective of why are we doing it, right? We're doing it because I believe that everyone instinctually, from God's original plan, has inside them the knowledge that he exists. Yeah. Romans talks about the idea that, we are without excuse just by looking around. We can see his handiwork, for lack of better words. Yeah. And I think that he has that innate knowledge embedded in us in a way we may not understand at first. But now when you hear things like this, it kind of opens that door up and lets you say, oh, maybe there's something there that I felt and I had an instinct for, but I didn't understand. And we're hopefully just kind of guiding them into those sects of knowledge, the different things we talked about, and it can give them the freedom to say, okay, maybe there is scientific and, whatever knowledge out there that allows me to believe these things. And we ultimately will find out that we are fallen short, that everyone has sinned, that everyone is, not right in the eyes of God because of that sin. And then hopefully that leads us to the knowledge of Jesus and the knowledge that, we need him for our salvation. And then that goes into the whole story of Christ. But so I think that's, in my mind, that's the point. The point is, I love somebody, I care about them, and I hopefully can ignite that instinct that they have naturally and help it to grow into a freedom to look at things objectively, with reason, with logic, and know that that does tie into the Bible, and to forget all this baloney you've heard about the Bible meaning you're stupid, or the Bible meaning whatever. It's like, that's not true. It's Satan trying to work against God, and and we need to just have a prepared defense against that. So that's how I look at it, and it's a powerful thing for me because I enjoy reading apologetics now, even after becoming a Christian, because I think not only does it help solidify your faith sometimes, but it's interesting to add to that very complex pool of amazingness that is God and that all he's done, and to put that in your mind and store it up, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And that's I had in my head 3 reasons why we should study apologetics and why we should be apologists, but especially the study of apologetics. One is because we talked about 1 Peter 3:15. We're commanded. We're commanded to be ready to make a defense, and we're commanded to do it with gentleness and reverence.
Yep.
So that's one reason. The second reason is just what you said. When I started studying apologetics, it just set my faith in concrete. Just exactly what you said. It solidifies what you believe. It just gives you so much more reason and so much more amazement
And trust.
All these things that help your relationship with God. And the third one on my list was because it's planting those seeds. Seeds of faith, not faith, but seeds that hopefully down the road will blossom into the faith that comes from hearing the Word of God. But if there's a barrier there, apologetics, and one person described apologetics as pre-evangelism. I don't know if I agree with that. It sounds good, but it is an advance to hearing the gospel.
Right.
But anyway, so we need to be doing it. And there's more than just those 3. There's a lot of reasons to do it. Do your top 39 list on the Google search. It's in there, but we need to be doing it. And it's interesting. I wrote a list here. Real quick, where is it here? It is, I titled it "The Multiplicity of Apologetic Disciplines." If you have an interest in something, I'm interested in biology, chemistry, and history. If you have interests, you can focus those from an apologetic standpoint. Sure. I just made a list here, and I wrote, God's fingerprints are everywhere: biology, chemistry, physics, astronomy, history, philosophy, morality, archaeology, paleontology, geography, and historiography, which is one of my favorites. But there's so many. You don't have to be bored with apologetics. You can find something that's interesting to you and research that as your preparedness. You can talk to someone about the geography of the New Testament.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. You mean all these cities named in Luke and Acts? those are real places, and archaeology has found many of them, and many of them that weren't thought to exist actually do exist. Luke just wrote it first. The archaeologists didn't believe it, or whatever. But it's not terribly hard, and it can be interesting. I think it's all interesting. But
me too.
It's part of our walk with God. We need to be prepared.
Yeah, definitely.
We do.
Well, I think that was a great conversation. And unless you have anything else to say, I think we can kind of wrap it up and just say that we love apologetics.
Yes, we do.
And you should too. Well, thanks for coming. I do appreciate you on the show, and it's awesome to have you.
Again, I'm honored.
And I do recommend that Cold Case Christianity book, because that's the one we studied at our Bible class, right?
We did, yes.
It's a great book, and it's just another book that has a really good perspective on how you look at evidence and things like that. Yeah. So that's a good one.
It's by J. Warner Wallace, Cold Case Christianity, and it's just a great way to look at an overall walk in apologetics that's kind of interesting.
And again, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis is another good recommendation that kind of talks about the foundational ideas that we have from anything from existence to morality to God. And he just builds a lot of really interesting cases and arguments for why the biblical God is true. And he steps it from a very simplistic understanding and gets more and more complicated, which is kind of cool. So anyway, highly recommend those books, and just research apologetics in general and look at it. And if you are in Abilene, Texas, you're more than welcome to come join us at Baker Heights Church of Christ here on Texas Ave. Also check out our website at bakerheights.org, and thank you as always for watching.